Good afternoon and thank you all for joining us. Today, the 13th of July 2013. My name is Joy Doreen Biira. This is Africa Speaks. And well, this afternoon, we're going to be letting you know what's making news around the continent on Web City. And well, let's start with a story here where we saw a GSEC that has for some time now been having students actually studying something to do with African leadership. This African leadership program is basically one that helps young African leaders enhance their leadership skills, as well as also contribute to the African continent's leadership. Now let's just take a look at some of the issues that were tackled during this African leadership program, and we'll be looking more at what's making news around the continent.
We developed a program in conjunction with the AUC. The Finland Ministry of Foreign Affairs is funding the initiative. We made it open to 12 governments, and they are mid to high level civil servants, public servants in positions of authority, heads of departments, heads of units, you know, who we believe will be the future leaders. And I think if you were in there seeing them in the last few days, which I know you were, the quality and the interaction is second to none. It is world class. And really, I think for the sake of the ordinary people in Africa, the quicker these people manage to get into a position of authority and policy making, the better.
It's an African Union initiative to build the capacity of our future leaders, not the far future, but the current and future leaders in the public, mainly in the public sector, from our governments, from different ministers, especially those have a strong contact or relation with using the ICT.
You need future leaders. You need the people who are about to make progression, who through career advancement and promotion are going to be in a position for the future. So I think, you know, in a way we're looking at the next round of very, very capable high-level leaders in Africa.
Now it's time for us to take a look at Click. Click is basically a segment where we normally capture some of the pictures you've taken on social media platforms. And this week, we are basically looking at poaching. If you look at that picture there, it's actually more like a monument that was put up in Lusaka, Zambia, that is made out of recycled polythene bags in form of a rhino. And that is a picture there that was taken from South Africa, or by some young South Africans trying to ask the entire world to stop poaching. And that one right there was taken by some school-going children who are actually putting into perspective what they think poaching is all about. And that one there was drawn by one of the subscribers online, who actually put into perspective, if a rhino decided to cut off your nose or your horn in this case, as a human being, how would that feel like? So in perspective of what we're going to be talking about today, that is pretty much what we did capture for you from the social media platforms. Now, today on the platform, we're basically putting our attention on poaching in Africa. Now, we all know that this is costing Africa her endangered species. And we're talking about the elephants, we're talking about the rhinos, and we're also talking about, you know, these species of ours that are limited in number on the African continent. We have lost numbers, hundreds of elephants in Kenya alone, in Tanzania, as well as in Uganda, and Zambia, and Mozambique, some of the other African countries that are actually going through quite a hard time to deal with poaching. And I would like to take a look at a story that Rita Tinina did just during the week in regard to poaching. And we'll be back here. We are going to be speaking to Raabia Hawa, who is a conservationist, and she's going to be telling us what she thinks about poaching in Africa and how this menace can be dealt with.
The recovery of at least 7 tons of ivory at the port of Mombasa in the last 6 months may have turned the spotlight on the country as a transit point for the illegal trade in ivory. But that is just half the story. In the Kenyan wild, elephants continue to face increased threats from poachers. Since the beginning of the year, the country has lost 162 elephants to poachers.
We are looking at loopholes that could have led to that kind of thing occurring.
KWS does not rule out that the Servo elephant massacre could have been an inside job, but has a warning to those who may be holding brief for poachers in the parks.
We don't forgive because we have a duty of ensuring that we conserve our heritage.
The African elephant remains an iconic symbol of successful wildlife conservation, but recent developments in the country, including the seizure of large amounts of ivory, are pointing to worrying new trends. KWS says sentences imposed on poachers are one of the major drawbacks in the fight against poaching.
A person is found to be having ivory, and you go to court and you are fined maybe 2,000 to 5,000 shillings.
Now we're seeing tons of ivory tusks or ivory that has been seized in Mombasa, and this is happening not only in Kenya, it's happening in Uganda, it's happening in Tanzania. In fact, in Tanzania, they are thinking of using drones to deal with poaching. But is this the answer to killing the trade, knowing that it is a lucrative business in Asia? Now, of course, we're all wondering how exactly did these tons of ivory cross the borders, because these tons of ivory came through Malaba, and by the time they actually got to Mombasa, everybody is wondering how exactly did they cross or get into the country and then end up at the Mombasa port. But we also have an official from the Kenya Ports Authority who is explaining how these ivory tusks made their way to Mombasa, and here's his explanation.
Ilikuwa imetoka Kampala, Uganda, na ikaingilia Kenya kupitia border ya Malaba. The declaration was misleading because it was showing dried fish mouse. Mouse is a product from fish. They were destined to Malaysia. They were destined to Malaysia.
Well, there we go. Now, in a bid to raise a new breed of outstanding leaders in Africa as well, we should consider poaching as one of the biggest challenges that we are facing in Africa today. And joining us to talk about poaching and the ivory trade, remember that you can actually join us on social media, on Twitter and Facebook, Africa Speaks, and the hashtag on Twitter is Africa Speaks. Now, joining us today and this afternoon to talk about poaching and ivory trade and how she thinks this can be dealt with is Raabia Hawa, who is a conservationist, joining us to speak to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joy.
How are you doing this afternoon?
Pleasure to be here, yes.
Yeah?
I'm well.
Well, how do you think, or what does this whole recent, outburst of ivory trade and poaching, how does it make you feel as a conservationist?
Extremely frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
As a Kenyan, it just makes me feel very sad, because it's almost like I can see our future going down the drain right in front of me,
mm-hmm.
and there's so little that that seems to be, being done about the situation.
Okay, and I would like to know from you, a conservationist, you've been doing this for quite some time,
yeah.
and you've seen the numbers going down when it comes to elephants and the rhinos that we are losing. From your perspective, how bad is it?
I think it's extremely bad. There are no words that can adequately describe how bad it is, and it seems to just get worse and worse every year. And I think that as long as we keep the trade open, and this again is up to CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species,
mm-hmm.
as long as the trade remains open, there's always going to be a demand, there's always going to be a want for people to buy ivory, and as long as people want to buy ivory, there's going to be somebody there to kill an elephant to obtain it.
Well, the bigger question here has always been who exactly is killing our elephants, because at the end of the day, we are seeing tons and tons of ivory,
Yeah.
being seized. And we are wondering who exactly is killing these elephants.
Well, I think the correct question would be who is buying the ivory? Because if we don't, identify who's buying the ivory, how do we really tackle the trade aspect
Mm-hmm.
of the situation? And really, the main consumers of ivory remain the countries in the Far East, China, Thailand, Vietnam, mainly by rhino horn. And we really have been, as conservationists, appealing to these governments and to the individuals within these countries to please stop buying ivory, because we're losing our elephants back home, and it's a situation that really needs to be controlled, and we've got to work from all angles to make it possible.
Okay, and when you look at, you know, the different African countries and the laws that these African countries have, let's start with Kenya, for instance. We have a pending wildlife bill.
Yeah.
You know, it has been pending for quite some time now. Do you think that the weak laws that we have are also contributing to, you know, the poaching trade or the poaching menace even worsening?
For the moment, I think what we need to remember is that the wildlife bill is not yet a public document. It's still in the AG's office. My personal feeling, and the feeling of many others, is there hasn't been adequate public inclusion or involvement in the formulating of this bill. And I think we just have to wait and see if the parliamentarians are actually going to include the amendments to the penalties in the wildlife bill, which will then be made a public document, and then we can all review it and give our comments on it.
I tell you what, in South Africa, the Minister of Tourism and Trade was actually thinking that possibly they should legalize. They are proposing legalization of, you know, IvoryTrade, especially for the spike loads that they have right now in the country. Do you think that this could be the way forward for Africa? Because if we already have these tusks seized, tons of them, and then we have to destroy them, yet we are looking at money on the side here that maybe can come out of these tusks. Do you think that partial legalization could work for Africa?
Definitely not. I mean, if you look at the history of CITES, they began with a one-off sales of ivory stockpiles where you had legal ivory in a stockpile, and a country would say, okay, I've got 100 tons, I want to sell that and make some money to protect elephants. But as soon as you open that trade window, everybody wants a piece of it, and then you've got poachers working double time to get more ivory, because now they can sneak it in and they can make fake documents, and it's very difficult to regulate something like that. So I think no.
Well, no, as you put it. But now we are actually being joined by Asha Mwilu, who is on standby in South Africa. And I would actually like to hear from Asha. Asha, if you can hear me right now, I'd like to know from you, what is the feeling in South Africa when it comes to poaching, especially the rhinos that Africa is losing at a very fast pace?
Thank you, Joy, and thanks for joining us. Good afternoon to you from South Africa. When we talk about anti-poaching strategies, of course, South Africa comes to mind in the African continent. In fact, South Africa has been in the forefront in fighting this menace that has really affected some of the animals here. Rhinos are the most affected when it comes to poaching activities down south. The statistics are quite shocking, Joy. South Africa hosts 20,000 rhinos currently. That is 70% of the entire rhino population in the whole world. This means that these rhinos have to be protected. But since 2009, poaching activities have really accelerated here in South Africa. In fact, just last year, shocking statistics, 668 rhinos were killed by poachers. Such statistics made the South African government to rethink strategies on how to curb this menace, including having stiffer penalties for suspects that have been arrested in connection to poaching activities. Now, what's happened this year so far is that halfway into the year, 480 rhinos have been killed so far. This is, again, a really shocking statistics, Joy. And what the government is trying to do now, inclusive of anti-poaching initiatives, probably like Save the Rhino, that is being done in conjunction with private companies and the entire South African community, the government is now engaging other countries. Kruger National Park is one of the national parks that hosts a majority of these rhinos, and this is shared with countries like Mozambique and Zimbabwe, Mozambique being one of the greatest borders that includes this Kruger National Park. In fact, they say that most rhinos move from Mozambique into South Africa.
Well, thanks a lot, Asha. And I'll get back to you shortly. Hope you don't go too far. Now, that's Asha there talking to us about poaching in South Africa, and also how bad it is when it comes to the rhino, the killing of the rhino for the horn. And if you actually realize from what she's been saying, Mozambique contributes about 70 or possibly 90% of the poachers in South Africa. And knowing that South Africa has about 70% of the world's rhino population, this is actually quite a very big problem here that we're looking at. And Raabia, I would like to hear from you. At this point, from what Asha has just talked about, do you think that we should also look at what South Africa is doing, possibly using drones and high-tech technology to deal with poaching?
I think that Kenya Wildlife Service is already looking into the possibilities of utilizing advanced technology for the purpose of protecting wildlife. But my personal feeling really is, at the moment, it's so immediate and it's so urgent. We've all got to pull our weight on this one. You know, the days of saying, hiyo ni wanyama ya KWS, wacha KWS wakuje kuokoa wanyama yao, I think those days are gone. We need to change the way we're thinking. As a Kenyan, we need to understand that the natural assets of this country are the sovereign property of the people. If an elephant dies, it affects me, it affects you, it affects every single person. And we need to think of it not only from an economic perspective, but elephants, really, you know, today it's elephants. Once they finish killing all the elephants, they're going to kill everything else. And then what's going to happen? Then there's going to be no reason to have Tsavo National Park gazetted. What happens then? Mzima Springs has no protection. You can go wash your clothes in there. You can have somebody can go and start bottling water and then sell it to you for double the amount. You lose out on the benefits of clean air, clean water, and all that the natural resources have to offer you on the bigger scale of things. So I think that as a Kenyan, or as Kenyans, it's all of our responsibility. We all need to come together and we all need to make every tiny step possible to making this change and saying, okay, enough is enough. KWS, tushikane, tuungane mikono, na tuendele mbele. Tusaidiane. We have to help each other. We can't just leave it to KWS alone.
Right. And I think that's the bigger question. And remember, you can actually tweet us. On Twitter, we are using the hashtag, we're using the hashtag IvoryTrade, and also our Africa Speaks. On Facebook, you can reach us on the same, using the same hashtags. Just get onto our page, Africa Speaks, and leave your thoughts right there. Now, I would like to actually get you also interested in some of the details when it comes to poaching and also IvoryTrade. If you come with me over here, we'll like to give you some numbers and also some of these countries to which we actually would say are the biggest consumers of ivory right now in the world. Now, just come over here. If you take a look at the source countries or the transit countries across the African continent, we have South Africa, which is in the lead. Like we earlier mentioned, they have 70% of the world's rhino population. Kenya has almost close to the biggest population of elephants in the world. And we also have Tanzania that follows. We have Mozambique, we have Chad, we have Senegal. Senegal, I think, either Chad, must be Chad, that lost its last elephant in the year 2011. And we have Senegal, which is now left with, quite a few elephants right now. We also have Zambia, which is actually one of the countries where poaching is overboard. And when we look at what President Obama said on poaching recently when he was on the African tour in Tanzania, he said that poaching and trafficking is threatening Africa's wildlife. So today, I issued a new executive order to better organize U.S. government efforts in this fight. And if you all know, the biggest consumers of ivory basically use this ivory as cancer treatment, cancer treatment concoction. And this could actually be a myth, especially in Vietnam. It has not been scientifically proven that it actually does treat cancer. And it's also used for piano keys. I'm sure most of us wonder what piano keys are made of, but some of them are made of ivory. And also ivory is being used for souvenirs and also jewelry and trinkets. And the destinations for ivory are basically China, we have Malaysia, we have Vietnam. We also have so many other countries across the world. Now, knowing that we know those details, the bigger question is, how do we stop, or how do we kill this trade on the African continent? Now that we know the destination countries, how do we stop this?
I think the first thing is, they always say charity begins at home. I think we need to make the first step, speak out about it. You cannot remain silent. Social media is an extremely powerful tool. Speak your heart out. Tell people what you think about ivory. How is it affecting you? How does it make you feel? I don't think it makes anybody feel happy, unless it's a poacher, of course. They're the only ones who would sort of benefit from this.
Right.
But the other thing is, we really need to put our focus on our ties with the countries that are consuming ivory. We need to appeal to our government, our Kenyan government, our Tanzanian government, we're not saying don't work with us, right? We're saying, please come work with us. We are happy to have you here, but can you help us? This is where we're having a challenge. Do you think you can maybe extend your assistance to this area? And I think that the government really needs to take a proactive step in ensuring that ties with consumer countries of ivory are not ties that are going to be detrimental to us in the long run.
But look at this. We are having China, which is possibly the biggest trader in Africa currently. It has the biggest investments amongst all the other countries in the world. Currently, China is the superpower in Africa.
Yeah.
All African countries are looking east specifically because of China. And if we're going to look at China being the biggest consumer of this ivory, they have about 37 companies licensed to do the ivory business. And we're looking at 90% of the ivory that gets into China getting there illegally, or it's illegal ivory that gets into China. Where are we going with all of this? If we are having China being the biggest consumer of ivory, and at the same time we are looking at China for investment, does this mean maybe we should possibly think about sanctions for countries that are consuming most of our ivory, or where we are seeing most of this ivory being transported or exported to?
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because CITES, which again is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, they've actually proposed sanctions on us, which doesn't really make sense to me, because we're not saying we want to trade ivory. I mean, they're doing it because they want us to enhance our protection. But we need help. It's out of control. And if China is in a position as an investor country to come in and assist us on this, we're saying, okay, maybe that's not such a bad idea. But I mean, I'm not saying that we should stop letting China invest in Africa. I love it, actually. I want this country to develop. I want Africa to be developed, but developed sustainably, and developed in the way that is not going to harm our environment and harm our natural resources.
Right.
We need wildlife in this country to survive. It's the very core of so many people's daily lives. I know there's a lot of people suffering with human-wildlife conflict, but there's people who are working on solutions for that. So it's really, I think, again, just going back to the Kenyan element of things, and maybe even the East African element of things, we just need to stop blaming other countries, okay? Let's just stop the blame game, stop blaming KWS, stop blaming other countries. Let's take the initiative. Let's do something for our wildlife, because if you're doing something for wildlife, you're doing something for this country.
Great. And well, I would like to reconnect with Asha Mwilu to tell us exactly what the penalties are in South Africa. Asha, if you can hear me, what exactly does South Africa do, or how exactly are they dealing with this poaching menace?
Have been arrested so far this year, and stiffer penalties, of course, that were introduced are set to give an example to anyone else that is planning to probably kill elephants or rhinos to get those horns for ivory. Joy, this could be an example of how African nations can learn, because one thing is that 400 million rands is on the table. Discussion between South Africa and Mozambique to fence that border where the rhinos move from one country to another. Joy, activists and experts say that perhaps African governments should now seriously think about intergovernmental relationships and cooperation when it comes to anti-poaching strategies. In fact, they even suggest that probably the entire continent can have one single strategy that every single country can adopt when it comes to poaching. For South Africa, the challenges are many, but they say that the ball is gathering moss. 668 is the number they're thinking of, the number of rhinos killed last year, 480 rhinos killed this year so far. And so the strategy is to bring that number down and perhaps get stiffer penalties and save the rhinos. Back to you, Joy.
Thanks a lot, Asha Mwilu, and definitely thank you very much for this detailed report. That's Asha Mwilu there. Now, if African countries don't take the lead, outsiders won't come and safeguard our heritage for us. This is something that was actually said by the Bonaventure Ebai on IvoryTrade. And I would like to hear from you as we finalize. Do you think stiffer penalties would be able to help us save our elephants and rhinos, or you think that it's just going to be an individual thought that we need to stop this?
No. I think we definitely need stiffer penalties to be put in place. And as soon as possible, because at the moment poachers, I've worked on the field, I've apprehended poachers myself, and they take it like it's a joke, like twende kwa station. It's like they know they're going to get out overnight. They know they've just got to pay 2,000 bob, 5,000 bob, and they're out. They know this, and they take advantage of this. They even tell rangers, they even tell us, see tutarudi, tutaonana, kwa field, and it's like they literally make us a laughing
stock. So how bad is this experience, when you get the poachers, you've been there, out there in the field, and you've gotten these poachers out. What is the feeling like? Do you beat them up? Do you shoot them? No. Exactly.
No. It's a feeling of extreme sadness for me, because I try to talk to them, but you can't talk to them so much, At the end of the day, they're there to do something, and you're in their way, and if they're armed, they're gonna shoot you. So, but we don't beat them, we don't shoot them. We do have rules of engagement.
Well, now that you said you don't have rules of engagement, you do have rules of engagement at this point. But well, thank you so much. I do appreciate the time taken to come and pour your heart out about poaching, especially when it comes to IvoryTrade. Now, let me just read one tweet here, and someone here is saying public awareness should be done in all corners of Kenya about wildlife conservation for a better tomorrow. And we're also having Walter Shakes, who is saying IvoryTrade, you're saying tourism, okay, Utali tourism, and I would like to say, well, good job, Raabia and Doreen. And we're having one who is saying a death sentence for guilty poachers could be the way out. Well, the conversation continues here under the hashtags Africa Speaks and also IvoryTrade, and we'll be able to recap some of them next week on the show. Remember, you can reach us on our KTN Africa Speaks page that is on Facebook, and also Twitter at KTN Africa Speaks. My name is Joy Doreen Biira. Thank you so much for engaging us, and also thank you so much for taking part in this discussion on IvoryTrade. You can continue the discussion on our social media platforms. For now, good afternoon. Sports Final is up next.